So I'm a combat veteran of the Marine Corps. I came back stateside, spent a lifetime basically trying to get to a certain level of within the military, certain tier status. Finally got there, got too many injuries, got processed out, and I found myself suffering from an identity crisis, I guess you could say, trying to still be relevant when I wasn't, and a complete loss of community, and I made some poor choices, trying to be relevant and trying to help people, and that's what landed me in prison.
From Second Opportunity and U-Turn Health, this is the Path Forward Podcast, episode 24. Thank you for joining us today. I have two guests, Self and Isaiah Thompson. So I'm excited for this episode for a number of reasons. Ron and I have been having conversations over the last couple of months, and I'm anxious for he and Isaiah to share the great work that they're doing. But I do know that in the incarcerated community, the last number that I read was there's 81,000 incarcerated veterans in this country. And that's a big number. Before I started the podcast, I looked up the top state prison systems by population, and the number of veterans, just taking the number of veterans, it will be the third largest prison system in the country, behind Texas, which has 133,000, and California that has 101,000. So if we just made that a subgroup of incarcerated individuals, the veterans would be the third largest prison system in the country, which is really, to me, it's sad. And the reason I wanted so much to have this episode is, as I've talked before, I'm in jails and prisons every week, and there's so many people. I was in one yesterday in York County, South Carolina, and there was a veteran right there, and he had his hand up and he said, how can I access resources, find out what resources are available for me when I get out, having been having served in the military. So what I'd like to do with today's conversation is just let Ron and Isaiah kind of lead this thing to talk about first their stories, and then the type of work that they're doing. And then for veterans that are watching this, or if your cellmate or a friend of yours on the inside is a veteran, you can point them to this episode to watch, to learn about this, and to understand some of the resources that are out there. So again, welcome, Ron and Isaiah. And Ron, if you want to get us started talking about your story a little bit, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So obviously my name's Ron Self. I'm the founder and executive director of Veterans Healing Veterans from the Inside Out, a program that I started in 2012 at San Quentin Prison, many years into a 32 to life sentence for attempted murder. That's a whole nother story. I tried stopping somebody from being killed. I did that, and how I did it appropriately got me 32 years in prison. I served 23 years of that sentence. And during that time, I did a lot of introspection, looking at some poor choices I made. I don't want to say mistakes. I believe in accountable language. And I think far too many people, when they're talking about their crimes, say, well, I caught my case, back in such and such time. And it's like, nah, you weren't at a baseball game. You didn't catch a fly ball. You made a conscious choice to commit a crime. Long story short, created Veterans Healing Veterans 2012, San Quentin Prison, and it's been a journey. A lot of trials and tribulations, learning about things like business, which I had no intention of wanting to learn about. My whole focus has been on helping veterans with PTSD and to prevent suicide. That's been my focus. What we do is narration therapy. So it's based on writing prompts and storytelling. The idea behind the program is that we look for the first significant or traumatic event that happened in your lifetime as a child and create an autobiographical narration incorporating your entire life right up into this moment. And what we arrive at is a place where we see where those events sent us in a different direction had they not happened, a direction that would have been more fruitful, more productive as just being in society. That coupled with military trauma, we help people find out how and why they're making decisions, often based off of repressed and subdued memories that are still influencing them from the past. And when those get triggered because of military service and then institutional prison, you get a bit of a trifecta there. It gets, three strikes you're out type thing for real. And we identify what those things are and move forward. Isaiah's been involved from the very beginning of the program back at San Quentin Prison. Um, since I started the program, I was asked to be a commissioner on the Veterans Justice Commission out of Washington, D.C., under the auspice of the Council on Criminal Justice, serving on that with Leon Panetta, Chuck Hagel, both former Secretaries of State. Leon was director of the CIA, General Pete Corelli, Joint Chief of Staff, and about a dozen other generals. I was only there, lowly Marine corporal, because I had an experience of being in prison and creating a program that actually worked. So I'm a combat veteran of the Marine Corps. Um, I came back stateside, spent a lifetime basically trying to get to a certain level of uh, within the military, certain tier status. Finally got there, got too many injuries, got processed out, and I found myself suffering from an identity crisis, I guess you could say, trying to still be relevant when I wasn't, and a complete loss of community. And I made some poor choices, trying to be relevant and trying to help people. And that's what landed me in prison. And that's where I met Isaiah. And I'll turn it over to Isaiah. He can speak a little bit.
Okay, thank you for having me. So my journey began, um, star athlete in high school, went to college on a football scholarship. From there, I went and played a couple years in the CFL, Canadian Football League, their version of the NFL. Incurred some injuries, and from there went to the military. And my reasoning for going to the military after going through college and living this life that was basically a dream come true for me, when it came to an end, I saw the military as a means of still having that camaraderie of being around men that you can call your brothers, that you have basically been in battle with or have worked hard together to achieve a certain goal. And the military was a perfect fit. I became a Ranger, second Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, based out of Fort Lewis, Washington, where we saw intense combat, moderate to support staff in combat situations and in other endeavors. When I ETS'd out of the military, what I found, like Ron, was an identity crisis because I had always been in a position where I was somebody and I was recognized as being a particular person or player on a team. And when I came home, I found myself like, really, who am I? Because now I'm Joe Blow. I'm out here with the rest of the world, and so I made a series of bad choices. Started self medicating, and eventually was arrested and convicted for double attempted murder and armed robbery, in which I was initially given 129 years to life, which was reduced to 45 years to life, in which I served 22 years, 8 months on. Um, Back in San Quentin, when Ron and I met, we kind of hit it off because we had similar backgrounds. We both come from elite units in our respective military branches and have both kind of like just went through an identity crisis, even being within the prison system. Because, sadly to say, I had the mindset that I'm not really like these other guys, but then again, I was because I made poor decisions just as they did. The only difference was I had a little bit more life experience than many because most of their careers of crime started very young. So my initial meeting with Ron came by doing groups in self-help, and he presented to me a story about one of his missions. And at the end of that story, I think we both were practically in tears. And I knew at that moment that I was all in on this idea of him putting together a program that would address not only PTSD, but past traumas from our childhood to preteen, teen, pre military, military, incarceration, and for us now, post incarceration traumas and how we deal with those things. And so I became more aware by going through the program, and I just immersed myself in the curriculum to the degree that I have been on his side since day one, and that will always be the case. I now go inside the prisons 4 times a week. We're trying to increase it, but we do need a little bit more manpower. But I go in 4 times a week, and am a part of facilitating up to 7 classes a week. And in that rotation weekly, I get a chance to watch men and the women prisoners here in California begin to make the connection of how they develop their belief system from these traumatic experiences that planted these negative seeds in their minds and basically put them in a survival mode mentality. And from that survival mode, without having the tools to make adjustments in the middle of a traumatic event or something that reminds them of a traumatic event that took place, we usually find that they default. And this is across the board. The commonality amongst how individuals handle trauma and adverse situations is unbelievable. They default to what they know best, and that is anger and or violence, because they've seen this over a period of time get the results from the person who's implementing this anger, this violence. And so this is what they defaulted to, ultimately landing them in prison or committing crimes that would ultimately put them in prison. So helping these individuals address that continues to keep my feet grounded, and it's just a passion for me. It's a labor of love.
Isaiah, you're doing this in the California prison system?
Yes, sir.
And are you working in the same facility, or do you rotate between different facilities?
I am at Soledad State Prison, or CTF, 3 times a week, doing 6 classes, and out at Chowchilla, the women's prison, Central California facility for women, in Chowchilla, California, on Fridays, 1 day a week.
And then we also have groups at Solano Prison, San Quentin Prison, Salinas Valley State Prison. So he and I go to all of them.
It's really unbelievable. So, Ron, in our conversation before the podcast, you had mentioned about some of the, and I'm going to use the word recognition that you received, or your program, let me say it correctly, your program received because of the work you were doing. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, one of them, I think the most significant is probably being asked to be a commissioner on the Veterans Justice Commission out of D.C., serving with all those people. I grew up hearing about Leon Panetta and Chuck Hagel and the CIA and Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then to be sitting in a room with all these people and being largely the person that they're looking to for answers, because I have the lived experience of being in the military, being in combat, and then also being in prison. You mentioned a number, 80 something thousand. I don't know if that number includes state, federal, and county jails, but if you add up all the state, county, and federal prisons, it's just under 200,000 in the United States. Um, so it's a significant number. And the biggest, I get calls from all over. We also started in Sterling Correctional Facility in Denver, Colorado. About 4 years ago, we started our program there. A family reached out. We're going to be starting in Virginia, Greenville or Lawrenceville in Greenville, Virginia, or anyway, Virginia. So the idea behind the program is that it be in every state. We also started the first veterans hub in the nation at Soledad State Prison last year. The governor put $4 million aside for us to do a pilot program at Soledad Prison. We started that, learned a lot of valuable lessons. That's another conversation, perhaps. When that kind of money comes into play, all sorts of people come out of the woodwork, and some really sad personalities emerge. And that's where I had to learn some business savvy that I didn't. I trusted people that I should not have. We ultimately had to sue over that money, and the hub took a hit for that because it was being directed in a way that I didn't design it to be directed. We're getting back on point, fixing that. But our goal is to have a veterans hub in every state. So in a state like California, where there's 31 prisons, the idea is that there should be a northern, a central, and a southern hub where you can divide roughly 4,000 veterans up into each of those locations, where the VA is on site 5 days a week, taking care of everything that veteran has coming by virtue of their service in the armed forces. And then any therapies in addition to that. That's the idea behind the hub. And it's slow moving, getting that going. Imagine not so much the politics. People get comfortable when they're in prisons, and we don't want to displace people when they're comfortable and they have a program. But at the same time, nothing good comes out of complacency. I know in the 23 years I was in prison, I was at 6 different prisons. And every time I got moved, I thought the world was ending because I was comfortable where I was. But it turned out each move, albeit it was uncomfortable and I didn't like it, it turned out being the best thing for me, ultimately ending up at San Quentin Prison. So a lot of times, I mean, I don't characterize myself as a leader, but I found that a lot of veterans would rather be led than be leaders. If you give them a good mission set and they believe in it and they see it's worthy, they'll get on board and they'll do the work. And we've seen that. Um, it's just having that idea and the wherewithal to deliver on that idea, because you have to develop kind of a thick skin. Uh, what comes with notoriety and popularity is also a lot of discontent, a lot of haters, a lot of naysayers, just the normal stuff that people in the spotlight deal with.
So the hub, obviously, you said California. The governor of California put funding to the side for that.
Yeah, he gave
So
me $4 million for that.
and to me, so we have, second opportunity program is a reentry program that I every day that's what I'm doing is fighting to get it into new facilities.
Yeah.
And so for you to be able to do that, I know what a huge victory that is to have the governor step in and say, we see this have such value, the impact of this has such value that we want to provide funding to make this happen. So congratulations on that. I think that's terrific. But could you explain? I know you talked about the VA coming in and then the trauma stuff and what have you, but what is your vision of what this would look like if you continue on the course of trying to get it into different states? So are these hubs, do they work, do they connect to each other for different services, or are they standalone, just handling the services available in
So,
California and the one in Colorado?
so first you have to look at it from a federal perspective and a state perspective. Each state is governed differently, so they're completely different and they're not connected because it's an individual state. Whereas in the federal government, the Bureau of Prisons, they are the entire United States. So they can do a West Coast hub, an East Coast hub, and a Central United States hub, and it's all the same. Very fluid and dynamic. We're not there yet. We're working on that. At the state level, it's completely, everyone's doing something different. I mean, I think Wyoming only has 45 veterans in their whole prison system, which is a very small prison system. So each one has its own challenges. I have already gotten calls from Washington, D.C. Now all of a sudden we're getting calls. We want to implement programs. We want to implement funding. We want to do your boot camp out program from the TED Talk. A lot of things are happening, a lot of forward movement.
You did share with me your TED Talk, which was great. But boot camp out, will you explain that?
Yeah, so I mean, for anyone going in any branch of the military, I'll speak about the Marine Corps because that's what I am, a Marine. You go to boot camp for 3 months and you graduate, you become a Marine. Well, it's every branch of service has a boot camp you go to, or whatever they want to call it. And when you leave, is what I'm saying is you need to go to a boot camp out that's as intense as the boot camp in to incorporate your military experiences now going back into society, because more often than not, a lot of veterans have experienced things that you would never comprehend in the civilian world. And I'm not just talking about combat veterans. Actually, the PTSD rate's 3 times higher among non-combat veterans than it is combat veterans. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. That might be another discussion because it's very nuanced. Yeah, the whole idea is basically just to re-socialize a person and address any traumas that the military gave them, and also address any traumas that they came to the military with. More often than not, people don't identify a trauma when they're going into the military because it would preclude them from getting in to begin with. And then when you're looking for services, service connected benefits afterward, if you talk about any prior to service traumas, then they say, well, you had a pre existing condition and they deny you your benefits. It's kind of convoluted.
So I was speaking with also a Marine on the West Coast, and he was telling me that they have, I thought he said they have a program or a way to translate a veteran's the tasks or the duties they have to into layman's terms so that an employer would understand what it is they were doing and how it translated to, the supply sergeant or whatever. It translates then into logistics and so on and so forth. So I think that there's awareness that that type of thing has to be available to veterans.
There's all kinds of different programs. I mean, you're talking about reframing. So yeah, a sanitary engineer is a garbage man. Well, it's the same thing, but that doesn't address the problem. The problem, the root core of the problems, the traumas, the significant events that take place in the military and prior to the military are what has to be addressed. It's not the job he did. It's what happened before the job.
And that's what Boot Camp Out would do then, is address those traumas.
Exactly. And you have, I mean, I'm not, I didn't have this brilliant idea and I'm the only one that's ever had it. Other people have had similar ideas. Just nobody ever did a TED talk about it. Nobody ever got the traction that I got with it. And I think the only reason I got that traction because I was in prison for 23 years. And the program, the VHV program works. There's all kinds of narration therapy programs out there. For me, the ones I was involved in, Guiding Rage into Power Grip, phenomenal. It's about domestic violence. Vogue, Victim Offender Education Group, phenomenal program. But for veterans, they didn't dive deep enough into the introspection. So I participated in both of those programs, facilitated for the Vogue one for a few years. And I just felt that it needed to go deeper for veterans. Now, you mentioned something about resources. For people that weren't in the military that go to prison, honestly, I don't know how they make it when they get out because they get $200 gate money and that's it. Have a good life. A veteran has so much available to them that they don't even know about. There is no reason for a veteran to go back to prison. There's housing, there's medical, there's healthcare, there's dental, there's business loans. There's just so much available to a veteran, but 99% of them have no idea how to access any of that.
It was interesting for me, Isaiah. We didn't have a chance to talk before we started this, but I'd been, excuse me, I'd been incarcerated for 13 years. I got out in 17. I started Second Opportunity in 18. But one of the things that opened my eyes is that there are all these resources available, as far as training for upscale jobs, and there's educational opportunities and different things that on the inside we didn't know about. And it sounds, Ron, like you're talking about the same thing for vets. And so what we've done in creating the program is we've leveraged our stuff through tablets. And this podcast is an example of that. So this podcast is going to be on more than 800,000 tablets inside prisons. And so this is a way to communicate what's available. And we had the dean of an advanced manufacturing school on talking about different careers in manufacturing. And then we walked through the manufacturing lab so somebody could see what robotics is and they could see what CNC is and so on and so forth. So it sounds like, the things you're talking about, I can tell you from my limited experience, but I'm in, like I said, jails and prisons every week. The men and women that I talk to that served in the military, they are not aware of specifically what those benefits are or how to access them, or maybe they're too frightened as to how they would go about doing that. And so it sounds to me like there's good stuff available, but we've got to get the information in the hands of the people that actually need those services.
Exactly. And for people that are in federal institutions, you no longer have access to for people that are in state institutions, you no longer have access to your VA benefits except for a small service connected portion that gets reduced to 10%. It's like 174 a month in California. The rest of it can go to your kids or your parents. But things like eyeglasses, medical, one of the things that we've been working on the commission is changing it to where the VA is responsible for you even when you're in a state prison. So they can still come in and get you your eye exams and your PTSD exams and all the things that you have coming because you served. So, yeah, there's a lot. And Isaiah's looking at a different aspect or an extended access portion of what it is when you translate or when you transition from prison to the civilian world. I'll let him talk about that. That's equally important. It's not enough to just do the introspection and find out cognitively why you made a poor choice and what was the history behind that poor choice. Once you've identified all that and you can actually speak to it and you have insight and you know you're not a danger anymore, you're not going to make any more of those poor choices, but now you're paroling and it's okay. Now what? You're paroling and what? So that's where Isaiah comes in and he's been working on his own transitional housing and continuing. It's a continuation of the process we start inside, getting the benefits filed. I didn't know for 17 years I qualified for benefits. I'm 100% service connected, permanent and total. And I could have had that for 17 years and didn't even know it.
So Isaiah, what is the transitional housing, or that the side of transitioning out from incarceration? What are some of the things that you're finding with the work that you're doing?
First, let me preface this or predicate everything on what happened for me. The transitional housing that I paroled to was something set up by Ron under the VHV banner. And so as I watched that whole dynamic unfold for myself, it gave me a chance to stabilize myself, to kind of like re-socialize, get used to being outside of the walls, being around crowds, being able to move about the community, and then having access, having a caseworker to connect me with the different entities that was necessary for driver's license, if you needed your birth certificate, filing different paperwork with the Veterans Administration for benefits. All of these things were under one roof based off the model that he had created. And from that foundation, I was able to successfully transition and find employment. I went to work after 6 months because they couldn't, VHB couldn't hire me on as an employee until I was 6 months and a day into my parole. That happened, and I began to watch and work from the other aspect of it, and that is assisting individuals that was going through the transitional process. What prompted me to start a 501c3 and basically predicate everything that we're doing on transitional housing is after he left the organization who he had paired up with, I recognized that there was a lot more that could be done that wasn't being done with this other organization after they took over. And so I wanted to fill that vacuum by presenting and creating housing for men and women, veterans, formerly incarcerated veterans coming home. And from that model, have access to them the same type of case management and documentation acquisition that they will need in order to be successful once they're transitioned, so that they never have to worry about going back to prison as long as they make the right decisions moving forward. Um, the Next Step Reentry Center for Formerly Incarcerated Veterans, I always say, is the sister program to VHV, because it wouldn't have existed or wouldn't exist if had it not been for VHV. And so, having said that, we are looking into several different properties at the moment. We're really close to getting our first property, but there's, of course, a lot of just, meticulous things that have to be done first to make sure we check all the boxes, dot all our I's and cross all our T's, to make sure that when these men and women come home, that one, they're going to be within compliance, and two, the organization in and of itself is going to be in compliance with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, so that it's a smooth transition for everybody.
So we've got to start to wind this down a little bit. And the way that I end the podcast episodes when I'm interviewing somebody that's been incarcerated, and I'd like each of you to, if you don't mind, if you would speak to the men and women on the inside. And, this is your chance to talk to them about what you're doing, and that there are people like yourselves out there that want to help, and they're not alone, and that there are ways to persevere and to get the type of help and services that they need. But if you wouldn't mind, just take a couple of minutes and speak to the men and women on the inside, and maybe leave them with a message of hope. That's really what we want to do.
All right, I'll go first. I'd say absolutely, obviously, have hope. Don't ever lose hope. The sun comes up every day. Every day you're up, keep pushing, keep fighting, keep moving forward. If you have an idea, if you think something that you're creating will work other people in your situation, go for it. Hammer it out. Create a curriculum. That's what I did. If I can do this, anyone can do it. And that's one of the things. I think the level of success we have is because we have a lived experience. It's very important to remember that lived experience. 23 years in prison, the time he spent in prison. I know what it's like to be keyed into that cell, that 6x9 every night for 23 years with someone. You're basically living in a closet, a bathroom with another person. That could be trying. And that's actually the time that you really need to work on that introspection and work on those resiliency skills and keep a positive attitude. It's real easy to get a negative attitude with cell searches and roommates that are just off the hook and just still doing the gangbanging thing. You're on a different path. You got to use your words, man. And just, you have to navigate things. And if you don't have the tools to navigate it, take some of the groups that just about every prison offers. And if they don't offer something, then create something and do it.
And I'd like to add to that. I would first say that the one thing about trauma that I've learned, and I'm using an I statement, is it robbed me. It robbed me of my ability to imagine a different life. It robbed me from being able to look outside the box, to be able to believe that something existed for me other than prison. After serving or being convicted and given 45 years to life, I thought that was it for me. And then I began to meet people on the inside that were positive and were moving towards, the self-introspection, the self-rehabilitating, becoming more self-aware. And what that did for me is gave me hope. It allowed me to believe that if I kept working, if I stick to the script, and I believe and can imagine my life outside of prison after being inside, then I can make it happen. And if not, at the very least, I can become a better person. I can become the person I was prior to my bad judgment, my missed calls, my bad decision making. I could be a good person. That would be my legacy. The part that I want to leave you with is that imagine your life outside of prison, then backtrack and realize the task in front of you, the boxes, if you will, that you have to check in order to make that come to fruition. It can happen. I am now sitting as a deputy director to a man who presented this program to me, or the idea of this program, while we were both incarcerated. We're now outside and we're going back in as a labor of love, as a need, because though we're not actively serving in the military, we are still in service and actively serving our men and women formerly of the military. You veterans, we love you and we're going to continue to do the work. And we just want you to know that you can do the work inside and one day be sitting outside helping others or whatever you want to do in your life.
Everything he said.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your story. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I am not a veteran, but as I said, I encounter veterans every time I go inside a facility. And so for them to hear what you just had to share with us for the last 30, 35 minutes, whatever it is, I think it's terrific. And if they want to reach out to you, Ron, is there a website you want to give or some information that you want to provide?
Yeah, we just changed our office address, and I think it's 2640 17th Avenue, Santa Cruz, California. Or they can call me or go to the VHV website if they're inside and just reach out. I have people reaching out from other states all the time.
And I will say this podcast, it's amazing how many letters we get from the inside. People are sending us letters saying, hey, I really like this episode. And a lot of what we get now is they focus in on a particular episode and they say, could you get this information to so-and-so or get this question to so-and-so who was a guest on the podcast? So for those of you that are watching this, you can always write to us. And we give our address out regularly. You can always write to us, and we're glad to forward it to Ron or Isaiah so that they can respond to it. Well, both of you, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. To keep things in context, it is 2 days before Thanksgiving. So I'd like to wish you both a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll certainly stay in contact after this episode. Thank you so much.
Same to you, and thank you.
And this has been Augie Ghilarducci with the Path Forward podcast, episode number 24. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Thank you.